BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello, this is the Farming Today podcast. Thank you for joining us. I'm Kaz Graham, and in this episode we're off to the Isles of Scilly, picking daffs to be delivered by post, why Reading University wants to flog one of its farms, and we assess the impact Donald Trump's new tariff regime could have on international food and farming trade. First, though, there are hundreds of islands around the UK, and according to the Ordnance Survey, 82 of them are bigger than 5 square kilometres, big enough to sustain farms. All this week, we are getting a slice of island life and hearing about the opportunities and challenges that face farmers on islands. This morning, we're heading about 25 miles west off the coast of Cornwall to the Isles of Scilly. Now, frost is rare in Scilly, which means that cut flowers can be grown outdoors in both the winter and early spring. The flower industry there is a fraction of the size it once was, being unable to compete with cheap imported flowers produced on a mass scale. But Sarah Swadling has been to meet one of the island's growers, now thriving on flower sales straight to people's homes.
These are a double-headed daffodil, so we actually need the space there, the bit that covers them and protects the bud, to have split. We want enough length in it, and you can see this one's nice and long. It's sort of 14, 16 inches in length. We've got to get them at the right stage, where they're good, strong, long enough, and the right quality. I'm Ben Julian from Churchtown Farm on St Martin's in the Isles of Scilly, and we grow flowers, and scented flowers in particular, 12 months of the year, largely outdoors and some in tunnels, and we sell everything that we grow direct to customers as flowers by post. The other two varieties you can see quite distinctly across the field there are what we're better known for, which are the scented narcissi, and they are the Tazetta and jonquil types, multi-coloured, multi-headed most importantly, in a very strong scent.
We've come into one of the characteristically long, thin fields that you get in the Isles of Scilly. It's got a very tall evergreen hedge on 3 sides and a stone wall on one of the sides as well.
Our average field size is half an acre, which it sounds crazy when you look at the rest of the country. Every field has got a tall evergreen hedge, 12, 13 foot high, and that's almost like another crop for us. We spend a lot of time cutting, trimming, maintaining, and that's all to protect from the salt-laden winds. I mean, the island is tiny, it's 1/4 of a mile wide, maybe 2 miles long. When the gales come, the salt on them is unbelievable. It'll scorch the flowers and burn them. Living on a small island, access to people to work for us on the farm is very much more difficult. We have to provide accommodation, we have to build accommodation for people to come and work for us. Getting stuff away, everything goes into a mail sack and gets flown away, so we've got the logistics of coordinating with flights, small boats to take our mail from St Martin's here to St Mary's, and the Royal Mail on the mainland to then deliver everything. So pretty much anything you can think of is more complicated.
All the bulky items have to come into Scilly by boat, don't they? So does that add to your costs if you're using things like growing mediums?
Everything is shipped in on the freight boat, and then in our case it has to come on a smaller freight boat from St Mary's to St Martin's. I mean, if you talk about fertilisers, the freight probably adds 30% to our fertilisers, for example. And then for our pinks, we're growing in Acquire fibre, which comes compressed and dried, but still bringing that in bulk is hugely expensive. That's the cost of living on Scilly.
Are you able to pass on those costs fully to customers?
We've got a very specific niche in that we can grow outdoors in the winter, and that arguably gives us a bit of an advantage. So we're probably, even with those freight costs, I would say probably more cost effective. So we're certainly not passing them on, because when it comes to selling, we're competing with everyone else. Right, so we've come into the sheds where we would sort and grade all our flowers. So everything that you can see here on the table has come in from the field. It'll come across one of these grading benches, and it'll either go back into the cold store until tomorrow morning when we're packing the boxes for people and sending them out, or sometimes actually straight into boxes and straight into the post.
How reliant is the business on the survival of the universal obligation that the Royal Mail has to collect and deliver to the whole of the UK?
It is entirely dependent on the universal service obligation. It's the only reason we can do what we do. Costs of transport and the complexities of transport are enormous, and if we had to pay for that air freight, it would be a phenomenal extra cost at market value. But the Royal Mail and their universal service obligation means that it costs exactly the same to send flowers from Scilly to Scotland as it would from one side of London to the other. So we're very, very grateful for that.
How interesting. That report from Sarah Swadling. The University of Reading has a worldwide reputation for expertise in agriculture and food research. So there was some surprise when it was revealed that the university was planning to sell off one of its farms for housing. If the plans are approved, Hall Farm at Arborfield would disappear under a 4,000-home development, which includes 3 schools, shops, offices and a leisure centre. The university is asking for the public's views, but opponents accuse it of selling the family's silver, as Vernon Harwood has been finding out.
Hello, welcome to the Meadow Suite. Feel free to have a look at the proposals.
We will do.
Another day, another public consultation event.
This is a map of the proposals. We have the River Loddon running right through the middle, just to the north, the M4.
I wanted to ask about biodiversity, like badgers.
So we've done surveys for badgers across the site.
At the heart of the scheme is the plan by the University of Reading to replace Hall Farm with housing. The developments attracted opposition from campaigners like Paul Stevens and local residents such as Diana Thorne.
Well, as far as I know, they're saying nothing about the history of Hall Farm. The farm is about 200 years old, and it was farmed by John Conroy, Sir John Conroy, because he lived with Queen Victoria and her mother and father, and made it into a model farm because they cared about the land round here and the people round here. I don't think the University of Reading know anything about the people round here.
They're calling it the Loddon Garden Village. We are not convinced that it will be a garden. It doesn't sound like a village.
The Labour government is committed to building 1.5 million new homes over the course of the next few years. The Prime Minister says he's determined that will happen. Are you fighting a lost cause?
I don't think so. I think we can work with the Labour government, with the developers. I think we can work with the university who are selling the land.
And, we're standing here at our Hall Farm, where 600 of our dairy cows.
The university's Vice-Chancellor is Robert van der Noort. Let's talk about the idea of a century-old university with a global reputation for agriculture and research selling off a farm.
Yes, it doesn't come easy, but when you're approached by your local authority who says we really need to work with you to develop the houses we need to do, then, we want to work with them. It's a democratically elected council, but we just bought another farm just on the other side of the road, so we will continue our farming practices hopefully for the next 100 years.
But you already have a farm and this is it.
But the opportunity we get by generating an income from this, by having houses built in it, allows us to build new facilities, different types of animals, and doing things in a different way, because research changes all the time.
Many opponents insist the land should stay as a working farm, growing food, protecting the rural heritage.
Yes, I know, and that is the tensions we just have to deal with, isn't it? Because there is a national housing crisis.
What about that claim that you're a greedy landowner who's selling the family silver?
If we were selling this without thinking about the future, that would be a fair claim, but it isn't. So we have bought a new farm to ensure our continued research in agriculture. Yes, we sold a little bit of our family silver, but we bought some more new family silver.
Robert van der Noort, Vice-Chancellor of Reading University. Now, it probably won't surprise you that we are going to talk tariffs. Donald Trump's new tariff regime, imposing at least a 10% tariff on all imports to the US, has caused chaos in international markets, and farmers across the world are wondering how they'll be affected. Here, the National Farmers Union says it's working at pace with government on how to react if there is market disruption. Well, the US is the third largest export market for UK farmers after Ireland and France, according to the most recent DEFRA figures. The UK currently sells an annual average of £68 million worth of cheese, £23 million worth of pork, plus last year alone £225 million worth of Scottish salmon into the US. So what impact are these new tariffs going to have on global food markets and UK farmers? I asked Maria Gonçalves, international trade editor at The Grocer magazine.
Essentially, the tariff is absorbed by the US importer, right? But they may decide to pass those costs down the supply chain to their exporter, or they may decide to trade less with UK producers, or even that it's not worth to trade at all. So we could potentially see a decrease in UK exports to the US as a result of these tariffs, or it may just become more expensive to trade with US partners.
And if we take a more global perspective, what are the main agri-food products that the US imports from around the world? What do they import and where do they import it from?
Yeah, so the US actually does import a lot of agricultural goods. So beef, pork, dairy, cheese, and other cheese sort of related products. And it is importing a lot of this stuff from Canada, Mexico, the EU, particularly the UK as well as Australia and New Zealand. And it does also import a lot of soy from China. So all of these trade routes may be affected.
The US has been importing a lot of beef. I mean, it imports from a number of countries, including Australia, New Zealand. If the US isn't buying that beef anymore, is there a risk that it will be, dumped on UK markets?
It's worth bearing in mind that New Zealand and Australia are already huge exporters of beef and other types of meat to the UK. So it may well be that they'll try to kind of ramp up their export levels here. But also, as we know, the farming community in the UK is quite sensitive to that, as they don't want beef from New Zealand and Australia to flood the markets at a more competitive price. We'll have to see how that goes, but it is possible that may happen.
And do you think that some producers might actually have an advantage? I mean, for example, Norway now has a higher tariff than Scotland. It's at 16%. Scottish salmon farmers will perhaps have an advantage here then.
Yeah, they will perhaps have an advantage. So you could look, for instance, at cheese. The EU is the top exporter of cheese to the US. And now that it's facing higher tariff rates, it could be that, US importers will be looking into buying more from the UK or from another top partner like Canada, which has been exempt from tariffs this time around. However, it is worth remembering that tariffs are bad for everyone. Tariffs are bad for business in general. So even though they will have a little bit more of an advantage, we're still talking really increased costs all throughout the supply chain.
OK, Jonathan Reynolds, the business secretary, yesterday announced a consultation into possible retaliatory measures against the US if a future trade deal doesn't happen. I mean, what food do we import from the US that could have tariffs on it increased? How could it affect us here?
Yeah, the UK does import some food products from the US. We're talking meat, wine and other distilled spirits, as well as soybeans. And it could just well be that, the UK will have to look to sourcing elsewhere.
OK, it's very, very early days for these tariffs. I mean, some of them haven't even started. But how big are the repercussions going to be around the world when it comes to agri-food trade?
This is going to significantly impact agri-food trade. We're looking at a complete disruption of global supply chains. This is one of the biggest rewrites of US trade policy in decades. It will affect everyone around the globe. And you'll see businesses now look at their supply chains, talk to their logistics partners, their suppliers, and it is quite likely that you'll see a complete rerouting of supply chains across the world.
Maria Gonçalves, international trade editor at The Grocer, and we will, as you'd expect, be coming back to tariffs and trade as and when there's more clarity and new developments over the coming days and coming weeks. And that is all of your farming for today. I'm Kaz Graham. The producer is Beatrice Fenton, and the programme is a BBC Audio Bristol production.